things to discuss. I have a proposal for sending merge key in the patch by client. I have a proposal for that. It's basically have a new directive, and it contains a list of merge keys that we want to use, and it should be sent by the client. And this directive is optional if it doesn't have this directive, it will use the right now the compiled in type to look up the merge key. So it should be a fully backward compatible solution for that.
Okay. Okay, is that being under review already? Because I saw your proposal, but couldn't really get through it yet. So.
Oh, that's under review, and I have a offline discuss with Phil, and he suggests that pull the logic of supporting multiple field merge key out to a separate proposal. So, so the proposal I just mentioned is only a solution of how to changing merge key. It's still under review.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it was being taken care of because I couldn't get through it yet. Okay, nice.
Hey, sorry about that. Did you want any extra context from me on that?
Oh, you mean my proposal?
Yeah. Or are we good?
So do you guys have a feature filed for that one?
A feature filed for multiple merge keys or for the?
Yeah, because it's it's complicated enough because we've been talking about this for like what, 3 meetings now.
I don't think the multiple fields in merge keys is complicated. I think that one's pretty straightforward. I think the trouble we're running into is changing the merge key for an existing item is really complicated. And we're kind of lumping the two together as like we want to fix the merge keys for certain things that require multiple fields as the merge key, but they're really like two orthogonal implementations. I mean, we could file a feature. It's not user visible. It's kind of an internal thing. We don't even publish merge keys publicly besides the code. But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, if it's officially part of the API, which this kind of is, you know, I mean, if so, what I hear you say here is that the API is so complicated that we haven't documented it, and so we can change it willy-nilly, and because we're pretty sure that nobody's crazy enough to depend on it.
Well, this isn't changing the API format,
but changing the behavior of the API.
It is introducing the capability of adding a comma to support using multiple fields, but it's not changing the existing, like no existing request is going to change, the behavior is going to change.
I just, you know, here's my take on it is that, you know, I don't track this stuff, you know, as closely as I probably wish I could. And so there's a lot of conversations that are going on. And so I think having some way to write this down so that, you know, other folks can share it, you know, in proposals. Because I mean, is this, there is a proposal. Oh, well, shit, I'm sorry.
It's been 2 weeks.
I just heard on this one. I thought I just heard that there was no proposal. I'm sorry, my mistake. I'm gonna shut up now.
Okay, great. So yeah, the clarification was there's a proposal for something relatively simple that I think there's very little objection to. But in order to change existing things to use that are currently broken, it's a complicated set of steps. And so we're scaling back the proposal to not say, we're not going to figure out how to change things that are currently broken. We're going to introduce this capability so future things don't get broken. And in the future, we'll figure out how to fix the current broken stuff. But awesome. Okay, great.
Okay, anything else about keys in patch? Otherwise, I think we have Sam on the list next.
Okay, I just have some small PR need to be reviewed. The first one and the second one is only for Meng Qiyu. The first one is some refactory of function in edit option.go. Just makes 3 functions use less arguments. And the second one is add a simplified Chinese translation for kube control. It just the PR need to be revealed for only people who know about Chinese. So this is the second one.
Chinese, that's easy, no problem.
Yeah, I'll do that one. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay. And the third one is a subcommand of kube control config. It just the issue was made by Justin. He said currently our kube control config to switching a namespace is a little uneasy to use. So I just add a subcommand which can switch namespace more easily. So you guys probably want to take a look on this. And the last one is the last one is still the apply subcommand. This is for Meng Qiyu. He's probably still working on that. Yeah. Apply, edit, last apply. Yeah.
Okay, I will review that to PR soon this week.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Really appreciate you being persistent.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's anything on my lap, I'm sorry about that, but just make sure that all of them are listed in the meeting agenda, and we'll make sure to go over them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next, I wanted to give you guys a status about plugins. So I'm pretty sure you noticed we merged V0 of plugins, still without too much noise, and it's there already. It's in kubectl already. If you take a look at kubectl from master, you already have kubectl plugin there. But given that it's V0 and we don't have really any documentation other than the proposal, so we didn't, advertise that on the public mailing list or anything like that. But anyway, basic support is there. And what I'm doing right now, because I'm working a little bit with the service catalog stuff, specifically about adding some new commands to the service catalog, and we are looking to. Our plan is to have these new commands for service catalog available as plugins. So I've been able to, actually start using what we already have for plugins, and while doing that, already working on V1. So V1 is not our, 1.0 version, is just the next alpha version of plugins where we add some new stuff. So I've been working on it already, And basically, while implementing these new service catalog commands, there are a couple things that I really missed from V0, the one that were merged already, which is being able to, have access to the configuration and the global flags from the plugin color, so from kubectl actually. So I'm putting together something for that. So basically, kubectl is going to send everything it knows from global flags like the context, namespace, things like that, config, anything that eventually the user provided through global flags. So kubectl is going to set environment variables that will be available to the plugin, so that it can know, if any of those global flags were invoked. And pretty much the same for config. So sometimes in the plugin, I want to have access to what's in my kubectl without the need to actually read and implement the entire logic around reading it and all that. So kubectl is also going to set environment variables for anything else from the kubectl. That's the current in-use config, with things like the authentication information, cluster information, or anything that I eventually need to talk to the server. So in the plugin, I need to access the service catalog client. So I need to know, service out info and things like that. So the kubectl is going to provide that information for the plugin. So I expect that probably sometime around tomorrow and Friday, I'm going to open a pull request with at least part of V1. And that adds that kind of information. So basically, kubectl adding more context to the plugins it calls, right? So context based on global flags, configuration, and even some other information. That's what in progress right now. And with that, once we have that in place, we already have, stuff enough to implement some kind of complex plugins like the service catalog. So the service catalog is kind of complex because there are a number of new commands, and it has to talk to a service catalog API, do from read-only stuff like get HTTP requests, but also updates and creating new stuff. So once we have that in place, we will most likely have, basic things that any more complex like plugin might need. So doing that, I'll call for review once that is open, but looking pretty good already, and almost done for what we have planned for V1 of plugins. For anyone that might not be aware of it, we have, I think, 3 versions of kubectl plugins before going final. So that would be 4 actually, starting with 0. So 0, 1, 2, and 3 versions before going final with plugins. So the plan is, open this V1 pull request tomorrow or Friday, and right after that, I'll work on some documentation so that even not being final yet, we already have some pretty nice support for plugin writers to use. But that's it for me.
All right. Munchie, I cut you just because I wanted to introduce the Open API stuff before you started talking about it. But first up, so as part of the kube control split thing, Jeff Reagan is using basal visibility rules to just allow us to both record the current interdependencies between Kubernetes libraries and the kube control libraries. So they're all documented in basal visibility rules, and that also restricts new dependencies from being introduced. and he has kind of a documented step-by-step plan for pruning out different classifications of dependencies. And we're hoping that we'll put together a list of all the different dependencies and the different ways different ones can be pruned. Some can just do a search and replace for like client Go versions. Others actually are more complicated and require moving logic out to the server. But once we have that list together, we're hoping we can chart it across the SIG and maybe split it like 5 or 6 ways to get it all done. So I linked the PR, and that means if you introduce new dependencies in kube control on new Kubernetes libraries, build will break. Yay. The other thing is, OpenAPI is now available in kube control. What we do is we now hit the OpenAPI Swagger endpoint on the Kubernetes server and then download the file, serialize it to a binary format and cache that on disk, sort of like we do for Swagger. A big difference here is the Swagger docs were broken up by API group, which were much smaller than what the OpenAPI has. OpenAPI is everything. And so as a consequence, it takes about a full second to parse, just do the CPU JSON parsing to binary, which is actually pretty long. You do notice it the first time you hit kube control. So that's why we serialize it to a binary format. And then that means that in subsequent times, it's like 10 milliseconds to read the cached version off disk. But there it is. So that will allow us to do all sorts of fun stuff like make actually supporting version skew possible because we don't need to depend on compiled in types. It's going to make splitting out dependencies a lot easier too. And doing releases independent of the Kubernetes main release actually possible. And on that note, Manshi's going to talk a bit about how he's going to use that.
I'm going to introduce a new flag that to get the behavior of if kubectl is going to use OpenAPI. So it will be from 2 aspects. First is for validation, and the second is use that for strategic merge patch. So this flag is maybe called enable OpenAPI, and when it's true, we will fetch the OpenAPI spec just as Phil described. And if it is false, we fall back to use Swagger or baked-in types.
Hey, Joe, this is one thing where we didn't do a design proposal for it. It's more or less, a lot of what we're doing is switching off of just the data source we're getting from a compiled in type to something we get dynamically, so that when the fields change or are added, we actually get them. The only user-facing change besides things not breaking unexpectedly that I'm aware of is the first time you run kube control, it's going to download about 1 megabyte of extra data and it's going to look like it freezes for a second.
I think this is one of those where it's about communication, not necessarily about looking for it. Like, because it's honestly it's a localized kube control design change, right? It doesn't leak outside of kube control at all. But the behavior change of that lot of data, 1 second-ish pause at the start. You're assuming that people are going to have good caching, which is useful when you're talking about the typical workstation view of the world. But there are people who do things like put kube control inside a container and spin up a new container every time you run kube control, and then just throw a kube config in there. And so that's going to slow that down pretty dramatically. Similarly, if you're running it server side, as part of a workload there, it's going to slow things down pretty dramatically. So I think that one thing to consider here is there a trade-off to be made in terms of, like, can we capture official released versions of the Open API spec, compile that down, save it based on a hash, and then do something like an e-tag to the server to verify that we already have that thing pre-cached? Can we build a pre-cache into the binary as an optimization?
Yeah,
and
that sounds like a good idea.
And so I think it's just a matter of communication of, like, look, in these scenarios, we're going to see a huge pause, we're going to see a big download. I guarantee you what's going to happen is that you'll go out with this and nobody will scream, and then, like, as soon as you release, you're going to see, like, oh my God, like, all of a sudden this thing got slower. And like, if you can show that you did due diligence there as much as you can, it's like, at least, there's some plausible. I think it's a good step forward to actually make the stuff be generated and stop making some API special and some APIs not special. I think that's a huge step forward. But yeah, the 1 megabyte download and compile sucks.
Yeah, I'm thinking. So as Munchie mentioned, I think what we want to do is have a flag to disable it, and which just falls back on the old behavior. So we'll still fall back on compiled and types.
I mean, that's a good sort of like slip in the clutch type of thing.
Once it's been out for 2 releases.
How big is that binary cache?
Small.
So
we can definitely compile that in. Like, I can.
Or you can download that, right? I mean, can you make that be a content type and version that content type and download that? Or is that, like, what is that binary cache? What is it using to serialize it?
Go. I think whatever the Go binary serialization format is.
Okay, so you got to worry about version skew for that thing across different versions of kube control. Because, like, there's going to be people who are going to run kube control, not kube control. And so if you're using like any sort of, like, language specific, object serialization is a total shit show, right? So serializing this protobuf with just the stuff that you need that's been pre-compiled may be a sane way to do this. And then you can actually download the protobuf. So now what we say is that we have a compiled version of Open API that can be, generated server side and then downloaded versus actually doing Open API. But logically, it's like, here's the chunk of code that you can run server client side to generate to compile the Open API down.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Having the server just change it into a proto buffer, exposing the endpoint.
And, and again, like, this is some of the stuff that, like if we had, a good way to get a design review on this stuff, because it's like, look, this is, it's not officially a feature yet. Getting more eyes on this and thinking about it a little bit and trying to understand the full implications of something like this is I think, worthwhile. We don't have a lot of good processes around that, though.
No, we do not.
We're working on it.
Soon.
But I think you definitely want, this is a nasty surprise that, that will hit some people harder than others.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure there's weird cases.
Yeah. So officially you're not breaking anybody, but okay, so here's the thing. So, like, we're having trouble switching to Go 1.8 because, like, HTTP slowed down dramatically, and that means that we no longer pass the 5,000 node scalability targets, right? So this didn't break anybody assuming as breaking, but, like, in some ways, if you change perf that dramatically, it's a breaking change.
Yeah, that's true. On the client side, it'll be different. But I'm sure there's some weird stuff we could run into.
I know, right? It's like, it's really hard to foresee this, but it's been up. At least
sorry,
the 0.07 second startup was what I heard from Clayton. I don't know.
for the pods?
Previous version, yeah. And the flag is definitely a good place to start. But, like, if we look at sort of, like, the discussions around, well, that's, yeah. I don't know. So, okay. So there's no good answer here. But communication. We can, like, at a minimum we can do is have it disabled by default, but introduce a flag. So at least then we get, you can opt in to not breaking yourself. And then figure out
if the server, if it's easy to introduce in the server, right? Like right now, the server can't parse its own Swagger spec, which is kind of weird, but I think we can make that possible. All right, let's.
I mean, so one of the things that I can give you a little bit of a preview of sort of some of the ideas that have been floating around is we look at the RBAC example for 1.6 and how that got turned on with Cube up and then got turned off again. And so we're viewing changing defaults as being sort of something that gets tracked in and of itself. So the general idea is that new features come in, they're disabled, and then sort of there's a sort of like, okay, let's take a final look at this before we change the default to turn something on. So viewing it that way and being a little bit more principled about it may be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'll think about this some more, and then next time we sync up, I'll talk with you.
And hopefully I'm being more constructive here than my bullshit around the merge patch.
No, good feedback. I hadn't considered the server just serving the binary piece, but that makes a lot of sense.
And I would make sure you version that cache based on the version of the kube control binary, because if
it is, it's a version based on the server and the client both.
Okay. Key that cache off that.
Which means that when you're doing development, every time you make any change, it recaches, but no one cares about that.
That's livable. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, just wanted to add to you guys, not sure if I ever mentioned that before in the CLI meeting, but something we faced a few months ago related to serializing and deserializing on the client on kubectl, specifically to JSON and YAML. So at some point, not sure if you're aware, kubectl changed to use unstructured objects in GET in their printers specifically. So until that, we have it using the actual objects and deserializing JSON to the actual objects. And because of TPRs, at some point we switched to unstructured objects. And I'm pretty sure that we didn't face any performance issues at first, because you really didn't notice on smaller sets of objects. However, in our QE team, when testing against really large sets of objects like 1,000, and OC get started to take like 4 times what it took before, right? So and that's basically, I did some research after we got that report from our QE. That's basically because of the map of interfaces used in the unstructured object. So that really has poor performance, and every JSON API for Go out there really, there are a number of better JSON Go APIs, but they really don't improve anything when deserializing to interfaces, so not well structured objects. In fact, most of them just delegate to the Go parser when we are talking about maps or of interfaces, like it's the case. So that was a big source of degraded performance when we switched to use that. And we are hoping to when moving GET describers and printers to the server side, if that ever really happens. But we are hoping to improve that performance, not because exactly moving to server side, but because the server has the actual objects, so it doesn't have to handle with unstructured objects, which is actually the source of bad performance when serializing and deserializing JSON and YAML. So just a comment, but it happened in past already. So and some people realize, noticed the degraded performance that we got. I think that was starting in 1.5, something like that. Not really sure, but at least our QE noticed it, and we even still have a bug open about that.
Yeah, JSON serialization sucks in Go. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So the whole movement to the server side thing is like, is there a concrete proposal there that I haven't read? Or is this just sort of like ideas floating around? Because that scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, there are two proposals. Let me actually paste the links here in chat.
Yeah, if all this stuff was proto buff, like our lives would be way better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here we are.
Because I think, you know, I'm sure it's covered in the proposal, but like, you know, like federated API server, third-party resources, like, you know,
Yeah.
oh, we want to colorize. Now we have to like handle color. Like, I mean, the whole thing just seems like a bad idea to move it server side. I got to be honest. But,
yeah, I guess there are some good and bad parts about it, but you know, this is a really bad part about it, performance-wise. However, we could think about some other strategy client side. Anyway, maybe proto buff, something like that. Anyways, but that's the two proposals. I just added them to the chat.
okay, I will add it to my list of stuff to review. So yeah, I would say like anything like the kube control get should definitely be a feature because that would cross SIGs, right? As we start doing this stuff and it's user impacting. Because there's new APIs involved. It's, you know, yeah, it seems like that would be a big enough thing. But I know this has been floating around for a long time. I'm not the only one with opinions here.
Yeah, I think you know, even something like having an output format that is not structured but is well structured in the sense of not using interfaces and regular maps, like having an actual object that says like field key name and value, something like that, we would already fix the issue with you know, JSON performance on the client side. So anyway,
I think doing server-side transformations is something to look at, but that's different from saying server-side rendering, right? So
yeah.
It's not, you know, finding a way to sort of solve the problems without having to sort of, you know, do like, you know, count tabs and spaces, you know, run the templating stuff or whatever that, you know, on server side seems better. But I'll read through the proposals. I'll add it to my list. So then I'll be informed next time I bitch about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
the server side rendering, I don't think there's certain good things that like you could design that. Like if you just want to return a map of aggregated debug output for something, that kind of makes sense. There's a lot of dumb ways to do it too.
Yeah, I think finding something in the middle there may make sense, but I'll dig in.
So one other thing I kind of wanted to ask you guys about, I'm not looking for an answer here, even to brainstorm, but maybe something we can think about the next time we talk, is I notice a lot of PRs that come in that I don't think have anyone on this meeting necessarily reviewing them for kube control, or a lot of features that don't get discussed here. And they typically are like apps introduces a new resource and they want to add the create command for it or whatever it is, right? And on the one hand, I really appreciate them taking on the onerous of implementing all that stuff because we don't have the staffing to like build the create commands for everyone else. But on the other hand, I do feel a little bit nervous about knowing that there's a classification of code changes being made that don't have anyone from the SIG actively involved in them. And also, go on.
So, you know, we've been talking about sort of like, what is a SIG? and one of the things that I think resonates with me is that SIGs are formed for long-term ownership of process or code. And so if somebody checks something into kube control, this SIG and whoever this SIG is going to be responsible for that code, you know, over time, right? And so there's a certain amount of process that the SIG can impose as part of taking on ownership of that code. And so I don't think it's insane for the SIG to actually set standards in terms of like, you know, you have to do X, Y, and Z if you want to introduce a command and sort of justify yourself and maybe come and present so that we can sort of do a UX review of this thing. That's not an insane thing to do. I mean, I put some comments on the use namespace thing because I'm like, okay, how is this consistent with other, you know, command naming, right? Because this essentially is new APIs, new UX. So like importing some of the process from like the API review stuff, I don't think it's insane to actually say that we need a similar thing for kube control.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I tend to agree, especially the ownership thing, I think really resonates with me. Or if the test starts failing.
Something we did here at Red Hat at some point was, I think that makes a lot of sense. I probably don't have an exact answer, but something we did here on OpenShift specifically was to exactly distribute this ownership of some commands for the actual groups where the subject of the command applies. So for example, take kubectl create ingress, for example. So SIG CLI should definitely not own that, at least the parts of the concept around creating an ingress, like integrating with let's encrypt, for example. So things like that. In our teams here, so our CLI group is basically responsible for reviewing it in terms of usability, UX really, and making sure that it's following our standards in terms of POSIX compliance and all of that. However, the actual concept around creating an ingress, all of that is actually managed by something that I don't know, related to
the weird thing there
or something like that. But that's one idea.
So I guess that touches on one point, which is when the create ingress test starts flaking, who debugs it? Like us, them, So
I think one thing to recognize is that at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, the CLI is an API, and we have to treat it like an API. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't answer the test flake question, but in terms of ownership and review, you can't just throw stuff in there.
I agree. Yes, we should stop throwing stuff in there.
It's so compelling though. It's like I just want to make this thing easier, but yeah.
And it's so easy just to be like, I have a million things to do today, and if I just ignore this PR and hope that nothing goes wrong, I can focus on the other things I have to do.
Well, I mean, one thing that is worthwhile is, are there generic things that can be done in kube control that can release some of the pressure around this stuff? Like, can we take the create templates and have a way so that you can have a directory, you can install the create templates for the foobar thing, and it essentially becomes which version of templates are you using, and that's not compiled in. Can we go through and provide like an alias thing, like get alias, so that you can actually go through and write your own commands that do stuff, so that now it's like there's a little bit of ways to prototype and to release pressure from doing things like the set namespace thing, which I think is awesome, but like it sort of just begs the question of like, why don't we have set cluster and set user, right? So yeah.
That's a good point. I think you said some smart things there. I need to think about them more.
So essentially make it not this group's problem, right?
Yeah, that was exactly, and I'm like, how can we do that? Cool. And just one related thing I just posted in the chat. I asked Eric Feta, like I told him I wanted a dashboard that I can come in every day and be like, kube control's golden for release, no worries, or like, oh, we got problems. And that was really hard with all of our tests mixed in with everything else. And like 6 separate dashboards or links for version skew versus ED versus GK versus serial, whatever. So he put together a dashboard for us that has a summary page that I think is still being generated. But the idea is if we click on this summary page, then it'll tell us everything that's broken for all the kube control tests across all the different environments and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really appreciate it. especially because it's all green.
Yeah, that was my favorite part too. But
yeah, hopefully that's not a mock-up. That's the actual stuff already.
that is the actual stuff. Yeah. And one thing you'll notice is a lot of this just has the overall link, and that's because the JUnit test XML or whatever isn't being published. It's just like the Go test that just has overall. So one thing, if we want to improve this, we need to make it so those publish the JUnit style and we get the breakdown per test. Yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I don't have anything else either. I didn't call it in the beginning of the meeting, but do we have anyone else new that would like to introduce itself?
Hi, I'm Shahid.
Hey, Shahid, how you doing?
Hi.
Where are you from?
I'm from India, and I'm from a startup called Hasura. So I'll just put the link out there. So we have been using Kubernetes for building a PaaS system. We have been working on it for past 1.5 years right now. So what we are doing is integrating some BaaS components and PaaS to build a general purpose PaaS system for users. So I was looking at some of the issues to be work in the kubectl part of it. So we kind of figured out one of the issue that we are also interested in, which is about the kube control port forward and kube control proxy issues. Basically, we don't have a way to right away forward to port forward to a service directly. So I'm looking at
Yeah, I think we lost Shahid.
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah, anyway, I'll make sure I find him on GitHub and ping him. But anyway, always appreciate it. Anyone else has anything? Otherwise, we're on time already.
All right, let's take our 10 minutes back.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Philip, for joining from the bus. Thanks, guys. See you guys in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.